Today we're going to tackle this old door, and we'll probably do it as realistic as we can. So mirroring the techniques of Angus McEwen or David Poxon, just trying to get all these different textures in here. And our first decision is probably what reds and greens are we going to use for it. So I'm going to mix some color and we'll try out different colors that might be a nice combination. Obviously red and green is complementary, and we'll have to look at what greens go with this orangey red, maybe kind of a pyro scarlet, and this pinky red closer to Quin Rose. So we might try to do those initially. And then we have kind of a cobalt green, a yellowy green, which we can try. And then down here we have almost a pretty bright green for these leaves that maybe are catching the light. The other thing is there is quite a bit of shadow up here. There's quite a bit of shadow here. So we're going to have to assume that the sun is coming maybe from this way. It doesn't seem to be catching too many things, like possibly the top of that lock, maybe here, but I think shadow is important on these kind of paintings. So that's what we'll try. Okay, so this is our Quin Rose. This is our Pyro Scarlet. This was our, oh, good question, now I can't remember. I think I started with this cobalt from my palette, right? Let's just make sure. Yes. So that's cobalt teal. Cobalt teal. And then we went up here to the cobalt turquoise light. Cobalt turk light. And then we had the cobalt turquoise. Okay. And then we had the horizon blue. And then we had the manganese. So, and this was a mix of these two. Okay. So looking at the picture, they're all a pretty good combination. I might stick with the cobalt teal for the dark, only because it's a little greener to me. The cobalt turquoise light is pretty good as well, but it's not as dark as we need it here. The cobalt turquoise is pretty good as well. It would work. And then the horizon and the manganese are very, very light. I don't think we really need those, so I think we can skip those. Now, if you have those, the question is, could some of these be mixed into another color to make the greens that we have on here? Or the other question is, can we make any of these greens from what we have in a standard palette? And, that would be taking a blue and adding maybe a bit of yellow to it. So let's try that in case you don't have these colors. Now I would probably start with cerulean because it's the greener version of these. It's a good start. And then we just want to add some yellow. So I think if we add, well, we may as well just try it. I think if we add like a hint of yellow, it's going to be a bit too green. So that seems a bit, to me, greener than what we have, but it's not bad. And then the other combination would be taking the cerulean and maybe adding a gamboge. Actually, it's not too bad. Let's add a bit more cerulean. So that's not bad. That is pretty close. So gamboge and cerulean is pretty close to a cobalt teal. Not bad at all. Now to get that dark, you could probably take cerulean and maybe Prussian if you have it. If you don't have Prussian, you could probably take cobalt. And then let's try adding gamboge to that. It's quite a bit greener, so I think we have to go back to the cerulean. Yeah, so that's not bad. Look at that, it's much darker. And it almost matches, again, the cobalt teal that we have on here. So if you look what we just mixed, we're pretty close to those colors. So that's a good combination. If you do have Prussian, it's quite a staining color. But I'm just going to test Prussian on its own with gamboge as well. Oh yeah, that's way greener though. And then the other combination might be Prussian with the Hansa, or in my case, I think I have Indian yellow here. Ah, so that's not bad. It's much greener though. So I think we stick with this cerulean and cobalt combination. That might do the trick. So we have some colors. Let's just match these to what we have here. See if they go nicely with the reds. That's the other question. So the darker definitely goes with the darker red. And I think that's about it. Now the other question is, do we do some sort of wash around these bricks, or do we leave them as white as they are here? And if we did let's wet our paper. And if we did a really light wash of these combos that we have, you know, that's going to dry quite a bit lighter. It might be a good idea to have kind of a wash there and maybe skip a few spots at the top, but put that wash in as a background at the bottom. So those are our color options. Okay, so let's start with some of these stiffer ones. Basically, I'm just going to gather up some paint, and then I'm going to use a stiffer brush, and I can just kind of dab with it. Some of these stiffer brushes, let's take this one, are good at making lines. We don't necessarily need lines here, but they create fairly interesting textures if you just kind of dab them on and then move them around. They really go far into the paper, so that's the other thing to think about when you're using them. Let's go to, I think I will leave actually I'll do the toothbrush now. The trick with the toothbrush is it has to be a certain kind of watery mixture. And then what I like to do is I like it to point it down so that I can really direct it to where I want it to go. And, you know, that way it's a bit more controlled than just trying to spatter and not really knowing where it's going to end up. Put some tape on here. Oops. So that was the spattering, and you can do that at any point, combining colors and things like that. I just didn't really want to stick today. Yeah, combining colors is always good because it kind of does what it wants to do, and you can see what that turns out like. So that's another texture method. I'm going to clean off my finger here. And then you can also use these brushes similar to what we did there, you know, just creating. The paint will have to be a little bit thicker, so I've got some thicker paint here, but just kind of scumbling it around and seeing what it does. That also works. And then we have the liner brushes, and mine's a bit beat up because I use this one specifically for this. So it's more a dry brush effect, but if you have too much paint, it's not such a dry, you really have to hold it on the horizontal and, you know, kind of watch what you're doing with it. Try to keep it more on the side. So, and you know, you can vary how, if you go to the tip, you're going to get a more solid. If you keep it on the side, it's going to create that dry brush effect. And then there's my handmade brush. And this one you can use by just using the side of it. Let's get some more paint on there. Just using the side of it, moving it around. Kind of that sort of thing. If you want to go flatter, it does the dry brush effect. And then you can kind of dab with it as well. So all kinds of different textures from that one. And then we have our fan brush. And here you can just dab like this, not getting much color on it. They don't hold a lot of paint, so that's usually the challenge with a fan brush, is that, you know, they're just not paint holders, but, you know, just kind of torturing the fan brush as you apply it is a good idea. So that's that one. And then we have our sponges. I think I have, yeah, this one's good because it's got quite a different texture there. Now, you can wet these beforehand, or you can just use a lot of paint. Let's just grab as much paint as we can off this palette. Okay, we're gonna wet it. Sometimes what I do is I actually stick it right in a well that's fairly wet, and then you can go like that. And that creates it. I see a lot of that texture here in these bricks. So that might be a nice one for using for the bricks. And it also varies based on the amount of paint you put in that. So the more paint, the darker it's going to be. And you're just dabbing. You can go back and forth like this, but I find the dabbing actually works a lot better. So, and you can apply color on top of color on that one as well. Foil. So the thing with foil is you need a lot of paint. It does create some good textures, but you do use up a lot of paint in order to get this to release it onto the paper. So I'm using up my indigo because I'm trying to get rid of it out of my palette. So it's not too thick, but it's thick enough, I would say, like a, it's not really running too much on the palette. It's kind of sticking there, but it's not totally sticking to the palette. You can draw a line through it. So that's the, I don't know, that's probably what I do is I take the brush and I actually brush onto the foil. And then dab it like this. So you're only getting part of it. The more wrinkled it is, the better it is. But just some random shapes, not necessarily dots. Let's try another edge of this. I'm gonna try over here. Maybe use a bit more paint. Get it really dripping onto there. Let's see. I'm gonna add some more water. Get it in the nooks and crannies. Yeah, it doesn't work that great. So let's move on to the cellophane. And this can be used quite effectively. if I can get it out of this thing. All right, I got some. Okay, so you just roll your cellophane in a ball, and then you can do the same thing we did with the foil. And you'll see this works quite a bit better than the foil. You get these very organic shapes. That you can apply. And you know, if you want to have more control with this, you can just use a smaller portion. But very nice organic shapes. So I like that one the best. The other way you can use foil is you paint something, or sorry, cellophane. You paint something, you put the cellophane over it, and then as it dries, it creates those marks. It can be used for rocks and representing underwater, etc. But for this particular project, I don't think we need to do that. We have some squares that we can work from. So that's all the variations that I think we need to know about at this stage. And we'll move on to our first wash. Okay, before we start our first wash, I think it might be a good idea to just mask out a few areas, especially these leaves that are down here. We want them to show up. I'm probably not going to do the $5 because I don't really like it. I'm not sure why it's there. Maybe it's number 5. Or maybe this door was for sale for $5. I don't know. But I think it might be a good idea to mask a little bit of that. Mask a tiny bit here and there where the white might be showing through. The locks, as an example, I like the idea of the locks would be catching the sunlight a little bit, even though it doesn't really look like there's too much sun in the picture, but we can make that happen. So that's what we're going to do. Now we are going to do a bit of texture within this mask, so we want the edges to be kind of rough. So I think the best idea is to maybe use a toothbrush to apply the mask when you're not too worried about. I'm going to use this one because it's just an old head of a toothbrush, and that way it's going to have a rough texture and should help. Now some areas where, let's say the sun is catching this side particularly brightly, then we can use an actual brush for that, but it's going to be a crappy brush. But let's do the textures first, and then we'll look at what areas need the brush. My masking has gone a bit lumpy, but I'm not so worried about it for this application. So here is where the bulk of the white is, and it's a good idea to maybe test and see how this is going to be applied. So there, it was so wet that it would have gone on pretty rough. So I think what we just test it first, and then make sure you're getting some marks here. If it's got too much mask on the brush, you can always take some off. So I'm just going on the spots where I think I see some of that pattern. You can also kind of just dab it in spots if you like. And then if we want some of these bricks on this side to be really capturing the sun, we can do that. You know, a few tops of bricks as well. Okay, and then further up, I think as well, it's catching a bit more light. So you can just apply this kind of randomly. I'm kind of doing it this way for the sunlight because I think I like direction in the sunlight. But that's the idea. Just try to use up all the mask that you have on your brush. And then we're going to go back into it again. Dab it off a bit. Make sure you don't have too much. Some whiter spots here. Now this has like a pattern underneath there, so I could put that in. Maybe have some white up here. I think that might, I like more of a pattern to this, so I'm just going to kind of be random in a few spots. Got a randomness over here. There's quite a lot of whiteness up in this area. Okay, and now we're going to get a brush and we're going to do some finer lines. I have an old brush that I use for masking. So I'm just going to wet it down and then I'm going to put it in the soap because I still like this to have a nice point, and the soap prevents the masking from destroying your brush. And then I'm going to dip it in the masking, and then I'm going to go back to my reference photo and see where specific lines are needed. Now, there is this little line up here that I kind of like. Again, it looks like it's capturing the light. So I'm going to put that in. It should be straight, so I might just do it straight, and then when we take the masking off, we can put that color back in. The other spot I want to make sure that this part of it has a nice line going down. I'm just going to identify that. It doesn't matter if this is crooked. It's actually better if it is, because this is an old door and these are all bricks, and you don't necessarily want them to be looking perfect. The other thing I'm doing is where I see a line, I might make it a bit darker or put the mask underneath so that it kind of highlights this portion of the brick. So that's what I'm doing there. Maybe the brick is sticking out further than the actual door panel there. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same over here. Some of these bricks are brighter. I don't really need that one. The one that has the real dark against it is one that's nice to show some brightness there. And I think I can clean up the top here where I did this part of the masking. Looks like that's almost white. So if any of these edges are looking a bit too harsh or whatever, that's what you can do with that. And then just that sort of thing. So that's probably good. And then the other spot is we want these flowers to show up. So we're just going to mask whatever they are. Some sort of weed probably. We don't really want it to look too good. Okay, so that's capturing the light. And then this one over here is capturing the light. This is the darkest part of the door, so this contrast is nice. You can try to make leaf shapes, but it might be best if they're just kind of random. Okay, I don't know what this is. It could be garbage. And then along here, there seems to be a bit of a whiteness. And that is probably it. Oh, we're going to do some of the lock. So there's a few spots here. Right on top of here, there's a line of white. And then it's hard to see where the locks are, but there's definitely one here. So, and I don't think all of the lock would be showing, just part of it. Got a little thing sticking out on my mask. So yeah, just doing that part, and this looks like this side of the lock is showing here. Yeah, so, and I got some marks in here. Maybe just make them a bit more random. I got some marks up here. Once we take the mask off, we can mess that up a bit. Now I did write in the 5s there, but I don't really want to keep them. And here I think these are actually quite a bit darker. So that's about it. Just double checking. Yeah, I think that's all the masking that we're going to need. So now you clean off your brush. If you cleaned it off in your water, then change your water, because you don't want to get this masking into your paint. And we're good. All right, our masking is dry. So the first thing we're going to do is just do a very light wash. I'm going to use the cobalt blue, sorry, the cobalt teal, very lightly. And I might use a bit of cerulean as well. And just do a really light wash for the areas that are not bright white. And then we'll do the same on the doors. We'll start with our light wash with the Pyrrol and of the Quin Rose, and then the combination thereof. Okay, so that's the idea. I want it to kind of flow together there, so I might actually I might just spray the paper, because then it's going to be somewhat random what I end up with. And I'm just looking for my other random spray bottle. Just one sec. All right, so random spray bottle. I'm probably going to avoid the areas where I want it to be super bright. So I'm just going in like that. And then I'm going to go in with my first wash. I'm just using a regular brush. And I've already identified the whitest white, so this is really just putting some texture of these colors. Putting some color into this background here and there. I'm just rotating through those colors, like so. And then every once in a while I see a bit of this yellowy color, so I'm going to mix that with my cerulean. Yeah, so there's a bit of yellow in some areas down here. It's more of a gold actually, so maybe I use Quin Gold. Yeah, I think that's a bit better. That's just in the odd spot. And I'm back to my wash. Make sure, some of those could have hard edges, but I think we really want it to kind of blend together. Let's go with some more cerulean up here. Okay, and then down the door frame, we're just going to put a base layer here that has kind of got a gray in it. So I'm just going to do the door frame on each of these sides. Okay, it has a fair amount of gray, so in order to create our gray, green and red will create a gray. So I took my Pyrrol red, taking my cerulean, and I'm getting a pretty nice gray out of that. So So throw that down. And I'm just kind of going quickly with that, and that's probably up here as well. Because I'm going quickly, I'm getting some dry brush effects, which is okay, that's what I want. And then along here, this has this yellow tinge again to it, so I'm going to put some of that in. I'm going to put some of my cerulean back into there. Okay, so there's a fair amount of color in that. Okay, and then we're going to do our darks as the second layer. So let's just go into our reds as the initial wash. And where I want it to be super light, I'm just going to put water in for now. Okay, and the top is more of the Pyral. I might just do some random spraying here as well. So we have our Pyral that's going here. Okay. I'm not going to worry too much about the 5 at this point. And then it goes into my Quin Rose. I'm not going to worry about the dark part because, and then in here I have kind of the mixture of the two, the Pyral and the Quin Rose. It's kind of dark right in this area. Okay, and then probably up there as well. It's going to get quite a bit darker there. I don't really want a hard edge there, so I might just take this greeny color I have on my palette, put that in, because it is quite dark on these edges, and that way and let's use everything on the palette mixture for what's going to go into the bottom here. Okay, some of this cerulean, some of this cobalt teal. Just throw that down here. Okay, and it actually starts to be a bit greener there, so I'm going to take that Quin Rose that I didn't think I was going to use, but here we are, we're using it. And I'm going to put that down at the bottom where these plants are. So it's kind of a greenish color. Okay. Go across with that. There's probably a bit of green in this area with that. And actually I could get and a bit of cerulean here, just kind of have this whole thing. Give it a spritz. Oh, wrong bottle. Give that a spritz. And then I gotta get back to this paler combo. Running out of spots on my palette. This was kind of the greeny, cobalty color. Okay, put that across there. There's a bit more of that here and there, over here. A bit more of that over here. And a big spot of that in there. So I think that'll be good there. Okay. And then there's some of this up here. We can just identify that, where that dark spot is. It's right under here. And this whole area here is going to have those greenish bars showing through. So we're going to add that. Mix up everything in our palette again. And this part in here, oh, that's quite red, so we're going to add some more cobalt to it. Okay, we're going to go back with the darkest darks, but I think, you know, having some of that in there is not a bad idea at this stage. So let that dry. We'll put a little bit more of that dark here. Okay. All right, let that dry. Maybe give it a spritz to keep it loosey-goosey. And then we'll come back with the next layer. All right, so my paper is curling quite a bit at this point. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wet the back and the front before I apply the mid-tone. So we'll probably have to wait a few seconds for it all to dry. Just make sure this is clean before I flip it. And then we can start with our mid-tones. So let's get this good and wet. Take my big brush, or you can take a sponge, whichever you prefer, and get this all nice and wet. I'm holding it down because it really wants to ripple. And once that starts soaking in, it's going to straighten out a bit. Let's just make sure we've got it all covered, especially at the edges. It's important. Okay. And then we're going to flip it over and do the same on the front. I'm going to spray it first because I always find it's easier on the paint that's down there. Sometimes there's issues with masking when you wet the paper on both sides, but as long as it's thoroughly dry when you're ready to take off the masking, you should be in good shape. So this part doesn't want to stay down. I'm just going to help it. I don't want to push too hard with my brush, but I want to make sure it gets good connection there. So just push it down. Okay, so it's flattening out a bit. All right, so we'll have to let that dry for a few minutes here, or it'll be way too wet to do our mid-tones. But we can mix up the paint colors that we want to use for that. So we need to go darker on the red. We need more saturation there, more saturation here. And the greens aren't as dark as I would like them. There's a few grays that we could darken up. We'll start putting in the darker color that is in the background here. And we'll start putting in the shadow now. I think it helps to have that as part of the layer that you're putting down. And if you look at the picture, the shadow is kind of fuzzy. So we can continue on with that fuzzy aspect of the shadow. And then we should be good. The other thing you can do here, if you want to hurry up the process, is now that it's dried out a bit, is you can take a paper towel and just go over it with the paper towel to take off the surface water. Got a hole in my paper towel here, but that sometimes helps as well. This part here doesn't really want to stay down too much, so I'm going to give it a clip. And I'm having the same issue down here, so I'm going to grab a clip for that. All right, so let's mix up the paint that we need. We're going in with the midtones, so we're going to have a thicker mixture. Grab my mixing brush. So I have my Pyro Scarlet. If you look at the top there, it almost looks purple there. So we might even add a little bit of blue into that. It's kind of a burgundy color in a way. And then we have our Quin Rose at the bottom. So we want these colors to be pretty saturated, so I'm making sure I dry off the brush and don't add any more water to here. So I know that's a fairly thick mixture. This one is almost sticking to the palette, which is probably good because if this paper is still as wet as I think it is, we're going to need a thicker mixture to get to that dark color that we want. Maybe we'll do the outside first because it's not as important that be as dark as the middle. So here's my cobalt teal. Okay, and then I want a variation on that. So I'll do my variation here, which is the cobalt teal. I think to darken I used the cobalt, but that doesn't really darken it that much. So I'm going to try some purple. See how much that darkens it. I might even try some neutral tint, because I want a nice rich cobalt there as well. It looks like I watered down my cobalt a bit. So let's go into that pigment quite a few times. We want a good mixture. Okay, so that's the two darks there. And then there's almost just as plain cerulean. Oops, now this is interfering with my paint. Okay, plain cerulean, and then I think that might be the good combination. It's funny, these looked very thick, and now they don't look as thick. Wow, they've been sitting there for a little bit. Okay, so we'll start with the outside and work our way in. I'm going to use some of these specialty brushes to do some of this now. They're a bit dirty, or maybe, you know what, I'll start with this sponge. Okay, so this is what the natural sponge looks like. Sometimes you can find them at the dollar store or makeup stores. Stores like Michael's have them as well, but they seem to charge a lot for them. You can probably order them on Amazon as well. But I'm just breaking up part of that. And then I'm going to go in. And my sponge is probably going to need some water on it. So I'm just going to put some water on it, and I'm going to really rinse it out. You can even grab it with a paper towel, because I want to use a fair amount of paint. So if we start up here, it's quite dark up there. It's got a bit of cobalt in it. And that's probably good. We'll go over here, do the same thing. Now this part here has that bit of that gold in it, but we'll cover some of that up. And then go back down over here. I'm going to rinse the sponge again because I want more of just the pure cobalt. I'll mix another puddle of that here. Okay. I rinsed the sponge, so I'm going to wipe it off on my towel. And then these are lighter here, not as pronounced. I like that white there, so I'm going to leave it there. And then this one has some on the edge as well, but we'll do the brush for that. Down in here. And then we've got a really dark spot coming in this way. As we'll throw that in. Now that we have dark on our sponge, we can put that here as well. Okay, maybe I'll use the other side for just cobalt. Keep turning it around. There's not much of that color down in this part, but I'll add a dab of it here and there. There seems to be more here. Add a little bit of this in. Okay, and then when we get down here, break the sponge in half again. That way I can use multiple colors. Seems to be, it's a little more like cerulean down there. I'm just going to give it a spritz so it spreads. But that should do the trick there. And then I'm going to take my brush, my long brush, this one here, and I'm just going to do the parts that are right on the edge here. So let's go in and bend the brush. Don't worry about what exact shape it's at, but just do kind of these different patterns that we have down here. Maybe throw some black in that one. Rinse the brush. That's a lot of pale patterns right on the edge of this. Some pale patterns coming up here. Go back in with my sponge to move that around a bit. This part here, there's also a line across. Maybe we'll put that line in now, but we will do that line a lot darker. And this one here, it ended up with a nice white edge, so I might make the dark part. Oh, that's where the mask is, so you will never see that. Okay, just putting different lines in. Okay, and then a bit of dark here. These will get even darker when we do the final layer, but I just want to identify them now, so I remember where they are. Okay, and there's some nice light showing through that there, but we'll see that. And now I'm going to go in with this mixture. And I'm going to start doing these. Actually, I'll do the other side first. This makes more sense. This kind of comes out here. Very white, that wall there. Okay, and it's not exactly as you see this, but the concept, I guess, is there. Okay, maybe a bit more neutral tint here. this comes down here for whatever reason, and then there's some of this around that part. Kind of highlights it a bit. Okay, and then we have more stuff coming out through there. And we have a line across here, but it looks like there's mask. I think what I did is I put the mask under the line for each of these, so we're seeing that we're painting over top a mask instead. And then this line goes down here. There's a line across here. There's a line kind of going down there. All right. Okay, so we're gonna get a little darker on our edge there. I'm gonna switch brushes. So where we see the wood coming down, looks like this is not a bad combination to use for that. So I'm gonna put that in. Okay, and I'm just connecting all these shapes around the door together. Okay, all right, and now we're going to go back to a skinny brush. I might just go back to my Escoda. I'm going to add some neutral tint into this mix here and start defining the darks that are up here. So there's a little bit of, let's just do them as individual squares. And line them up as you go along. They don't have to be perfect, it's way better if they're not. Okay, and then some of these just bleed right up into the top. And then this one it's interesting, this goes across, and then there's another one that ends there. Okay, and by bleed, what I mean is, rather than have these all hard edged, just make sure they blend up into the top part. And you can even just go along and put some black in there so that they're kind of connected, they're not so separated. And that's what happens for the rest of this, is it's really just part of the dark that goes along there. I'll pick up some of this extra paint that I got here. And then these go down. Again, blend this part in as well. Just taking a damp brush. Kind of connecting that all up towards the top. You see there's a kind of a blacker part in there. Okay, and then these need kind of a flat bottom. I think it's actually lower than the other one. The other way you can do it is you can just extend it down, like so. And then take your flat brush and go across like this. Now it looks like there's kind of there's two lines around here. There's a line that goes like this, and there's a line that goes like that. And you can drop some other color in here while it's still wet. Maybe drop some cobalt into there. Let those merge and mingle. Maybe put some cobalt over here. Up there. Up into this. It's a bit darker on this side here. Okay. Go along like that. And then it almost looks brown above there. So I'm just going to add a little bit of red into this, which makes a bit of a brown. I'm going to put that across. And I can connect that there and there. Run maybe a little bit of that down here. And then kind of fade it out. Okay. And I might put a tiny bit of that brown up in here. Don't worry about those being too perfect. In fact, it's better to make them a bit blurry. If they're too sharp-edged, every one of them, then it doesn't look as good. So let's blur these guys out into the bottom. Same thing here, and just taking a damp brush, just going down. Do the same thing across here. We want this kind of soft in here. So that's probably all right. This is going to get a lot darker under the door. This makes sense coming down, and it gets much darker at the bottom here. So let's mix a few colors to make that dark. I think it has a bit of cobalt towards the bottom, but it's almost like it gets red in the middle. Okay, take your damp brush, move that color up, move it down. Here's where we can add this bit of cobalt. Okay, and then over on this side, it's quite a bit lighter. It's darker here. I have a feeling there's some mask in that part. So our next step after this wash is we're gonna take the mask off and see what we've really got. Okay, so we need some red into our door, and I am going to try to use this brush initially. We'll see how it works. Okay, so this is my Pyro Red, and I've got this brush. What I like about this is it leaves a pattern behind. This part here is really quite purple. So we'll connect all of that in a minute. Okay, and then a bit of Quin Rose, especially in this part. My brush is very dry, that's why it's doing these beautiful marks. And in some spots, it actually looked like it was totally red. So we can put those in. And then down here, there was way more Quin. My brush is a little bit too dry, so I'm just going to spray my paint instead of my brush. Mix these two together here. Okay, more Quin. Actually, it is Quin and Pyro together. I'm going to go a bit stronger. Oh, I think I put pink in there. Oh, well. Okay, maybe a bit more Pyro because I probably had too much pink on the brush. Okay, and some of this goes down into there. That's really nice and red. Right under here. That's a super red spot actually. It's kind of goes straight across there, but I think that might do the trick. Okay, this masking will it'll change entirely once we take the masking off, but okay, so there is our red. And now we need to add some of this neutral tint with a bit of that red in it, definitely at the top. I see almost purple right at the top here. Put that in, and that's going to represent our shadow. Okay, and then I want to fade that out. So I'm going to take my flat brush, and I'm actually just going to touch the very top of this. Clean my brush again. Some of it I can push up, and some of it is just going to drift down. I'm okay with it drifting down into the marks here of where the boards are. Okay. And then on this side, same thing. All the way down, this is my shadow. And I'm not worried too much about the lines at this stage. I can always correct them when I go back in with my darks. Just make sure you get a good shadow there. So I'm thinking I might put a bit more red on this part of the shadow. Okay. Now it does show a little bit of shadow there, but I don't think we actually need that. Like on this side, we could put it down here. And it's definitely all behind here, but I think at this point, at the bottom, it needs to have a bit more green in it because this is greenery. I move this out of the way. Okay, put that in there. I can drop some red into that as it goes further up. It's really dark in this corner here. And I'm going to do the same thing I just did. I'm going to take a clean brush. But actually, I might do it a bit different. I might go like this and extend some of this up first. And then I'm going to clean my brush again. And I'm going to go the opposite way. And then I'm going to go in and push it back down. Okay. There is a line going all the way up to these locks. So somewhere around here. This goes all the way down. And we can extend this black quite a bit at the bottom. Okay. The plans go a bit further down. If you see, the door has kind of a top part to it. So if we have the door in there, then there's kind of this bright green. So if we take our cobalt and we add gamboge to it, cobalt and gamboge, and we're just going to drop that in here. And we're going to extend that out over here. And I do notice it's almost like it's moss or something down here. And then it goes more into the yellow. Actually, we could use the quin there instead of the yellow, actually. I didn't try mixing the quin with the cobalt. Let's just give that a whirl. Oh, yeah. Okay. And then we'll put some quin on its own down there. Connect those all up. Okay. And a bit of quin on its own kind of out in here. Okay. It's looking good. Now we have to let it dry once again. My paper is now dry. Fortunately, I was able to put it out in the sun today because fortunately we're getting some good weather. So I'm going to take off all of the masking with a rubber cement and see what we're left with here. Because the masking was blue, it kind of gave a blue tint to the background. So you'll see it's coming out a lot lighter now. Okay. And these masking marks are quite harsh. So masking isn't my favorite thing, but I thought this would work well. And we can fix it where we need to fix it. Okay, so we have no problem with retaining a fair bit of the white of the paper. Okay. Okay, but it does tell me we need quite a lot of darks in here to make this look better. Okay, we could have retained a little bit of more of these plants down here, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, so this part here, we probably have to gray. This here has to be way darker. Darker here, darker where the bricks are coming out in many spots. Just feel and see if you've missed any, because I did miss some there and here. Okay. All right, so once we add the darks, then we'll see how much more we need to do. We'll have to do some scrubbing in these white spots in order to make them look more natural. I'm not sure what this white spot was, or these. Okay, it's all taped down. Let's mix up some good darks. We're going to start with the neutral tint. Then I'm going to add some cobalt teal. I'm going to add some of my Pyrrole red, Quin Rose, Cerulean, which might lighten it a little bit, more neutral tint, more cobalt turquoise, more probably Pyrrole at this stage. Maybe a bit more water in that mixture. I think I need a bit more blue. So we were using Cerulean. But I know we haven't used ultramarine yet, but I'm going to put a bit of ultramarine in there. Now it still is a very purpley blue, so I might add a little bit of burnt sienna. A little bit more of the cerulean. So it is a purpley color. I could probably put more Pyrrole. Let's see if I can add a bit more burnt sienna. So now it's very red, so I could probably get away with adding some green. Okay, it's not bad. And then I'm going to go neutral tint. Maybe some indigo. Let's throw in some indigo because I think it's just not quite dark enough. Okay, that's not bad. Let's see what color that is. It's not bad. I think that will work. Okay, so up here we have a lot of dark, and it actually extends right out into there. And then it extends down here, goes across here, a little bit, a jut out there. And then there is a pretty well defined corner here. This part kind of goes up, and then there's something sticking out there. It's very dark under there, and it's very dark all the way across here. And in fact, some of this is almost invisible. Some of this dark goes right down into here, especially over here. These get thinner. Okay, but we need to let that bleed down a bit. So I'm just going to get a damp brush and touch that. I don't want them too harsh there. And in fact, these are a little bit too harsh. It would have been better to use dry brushing there, but maybe we'll come back and we'll do that. And then this part extends out there. And it looks like there's a bit more cobalt out in that area, like kind of out here. And then kind of under here. We'll put that there. And again, this part here, this corner is super dark. But again, I want that color to, I don't want so many hard edges. So I'm going to put some more cobalt there. And then I'm going to keep softening this edge. So it's too rough looking. And let's see if we can use something as a dry brush. Let's try this one. Because when I look at that, I see that some of that is just dry brushing. It's not even solid there. I'm just testing my dry brushing with this. Yeah, that's kind of what I see. It's more, and then here we could dry brush a little down here to fade these top ones out. I always find it's a good idea to test it first when you first apply the paint, to figure out if you have enough. Okay, so that's going to just help kind of blend those down. I'm just scrubbing that a bit. And same thing across here. It's not really as light as you think. In fact, it's really quite dark across the top here. You don't even see these. Well, it's not bad. And then some of this is more cobalt, not as bright as we did there. So let's just kind of fade that out as well. It's a bit too harsh with that masking. Fade that down. Okay, so that looks a bit better. And then back to my black brush, or my neutral tint that I have here. I'm not quite doing this exactly the way it shows, but I think we're all right. And then this is a bit too bright along here. That wouldn't show up that bright. So what I could do is back to the one that had cobalt. Let's just go along like that. And then take my damp brush and move that up. Okay, I think that looks a bit better. And some of those spots, like this spot here, is almost all black. Some of these spots here are black right up into here. There's no definition of when this stops. Okay. All right, good. So let's take our damp brush again, and we're going to go along here. I'm going to wet it. And then I'm going to put this shadow in again. Nice and dark all the way along there. I made a mistake and went a bit too far over there. But actually I could do that, because it does look like I missed the line there. Okay. And then I want to do the same. I want to go down here with the damp brush. And I want to put this dark in. It helps sometimes to look not where you're painting when you're drawing a straight line, but to look where you're going. It's kind of like driving, where you shouldn't be looking right in front of you. You should be looking ahead. Same concept. It helps you paint a straighter line. We might fill that part more in with red as we go down that side. But okay, so I think that's good. There's a dark spot somewhere around here. We'll put that in. And then there's another dark spot somewhere around here. Put that in. They look like they're almost parallel to one another. Another one there. Okay. Now, we're going to have to do this red first before we do any of this detail in here. So let's do that. And then we'll come back. So we're going to go back to the reds that we were using earlier. I might have to clean off my palette because this is all mixed in together, and I remember there was some pink in there. Let's get rid of this. Good enough, really. And then I need my mixing brush, which I have over here. And we have our Pyro Red, which is going to go at the top. And then we have our Quin Rose, which is going to go at the bottom. And again, I'm going to make sure these are fairly thick mixtures. They got to be sticking to the palette a bit. Maybe a bit more red. Clean out all the red in here. Okay, now I've got a very dirty brush, so I'm just going to take my brush and clean it off. In fact, I probably should clean my water because it is very dark. I'm going to do that. Okay, I am back. Okay, so we want to roughen up this part here. Let's start with the Pyro. And we just want to make sure these look a little bit more natural. Okay. That's probably okay there. Okay, that's good enough. And then we have the Quin Rose down here. I don't know how I decided that those should be that color, but and then here, and then mix those two colors together. It's okay if some of this ends up in this green as well. Okay, and then I'm going to take this brush, my fine brush, and I'm just going to go underneath here. With some color, because I see that that's very dark there. I also want to go down this side and define this edge better. Okay. It may, be a little bit in the dark. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, so I think once we add those will show up better. We do have some well-defined red spots, so I'm just putting a few of those in where the paint looks like maybe it did stick. And then down here, the red is mixed with this color, and I can try to dry brush some of that down as well. So it looks a bit rougher there, and I think it should look a bit rougher over here as well. And then it definitely looks rougher down at the bottom. Okay, and I could change to that bigger brush I was just using to do that part. Let's try that. Put a lot of dark on it. Okay, and then underneath here, there's a fair amount of dark all around in this area. There's a shadow going across here. Okay, and then we have these lines. If your paper is aligned with the edge of your board, you can do this as well to draw lines. You can put your finger there and use your finger to guide you as you do your lines down. So it's another way of drawing lines. Make sure when you start off, you've got it where you want it. And just keep your finger there and hold it, and that will do the trick. Now here, it's a bit further over. Okay. And then this one here is quite dark. So I'm just going to put that in. And it goes down to this area here, where this is also quite dark. I seem to be running out of paint though. So a line goes across here. I'm okay with this being rough edged. And then there's something black, a black square in here, whatever that is. This is a bit. And then there's different colors in this part underneath. So there's a bit of red, but I see a bit of purple, a bit of blue. So I'm just gonna try those different colors. Okay. And then some of that is quite well defined. It looks almost like this goes across, and then there's another one on top that's maybe a piece of wood or something, I don't know. Something like that. And this has a bigger shadow underneath it. So let's just take some neutral tint. And then above this, there's some lines as well. Something like that. But I see a big shadow under here. So I'm going to put that in. There's a shadow. This is where the lock is, and there's a shadow on the side of that. And then the lock itself is quite dark. It goes under here. Okay, so that's one of the locks. We did this thing underneath. We want to extend this line further down. And we want to extend this line here. Well, actually that line was supposed to be on the other side of that, but that's okay. No one's going to look at the reference photo. And then this is, there's another lock here. And above that lock, there is also another piece of wood. And that goes over to about there. This needs a shadow on it for it to look effective. Same with this one. Let's make sure it's got a good shadow. And then the lock hangs down here. Okay. And we might put a bit of color on that lock as we move forward, but for now we'll just leave it. Okay, this line continues down to there. And then it gets even darker down here. But there happens to be another lock right here. And there's another piece of wood right there. So that piece of wood also has a very dark shadow underneath it. Like so. That dark shadow goes through here. And then there's something over here. Different kinds of things. Who knows what they are, just things. Okay, and that is another lock. Okay, I have these two white spots here. I don't really know what they were about, so I'm just gonna darken them out a bit. Here we need to make sure this line, and then we've got some lines coming down here. So this one looks a little crooked, but that's okay. I can make it crooked. Okay. And we could put some cracks. I like the cracks coming down here. Dots. If the masking is showing through and you don't like the way it looks, just apply more paint there. We could even have a hole in the door up there. And yeah, there's these different black spots here. Let's throw some of those in. Okay, there's another. Now this I have to do red across because otherwise it doesn't look right. So I'm going to make this thing red. And it gives me the opportunity to reshape this lock because that part of the lock wouldn't be that. So we're leaving those quite bright right now, those locks, but we might fix them anyway at some point. Just going to make this look like there's something coming up from it. And here we need to make sure this looks like there's something coming out from it. Okay. I think that might work. And then let's put, oops, wrong bucket. Let's put some more neutral tint at the bottom here. That neutral tint has such a rich color, so I'm going to try mixing it just with red, which produces a brown, so that's not really what I want. Let's try some of this cerulean. That mixture is a bit of a tough one. Yeah, that's too watery. A bit red, so let's put some green in it. Too much water. Okay, well, we will figure it out. This has got to get a lot darker down here. And if you do too many layers, it doesn't really help it out that much. Okay, so I think we're okay. Let's just do the darks up here that we see. That's probably okay. This has a line coming out of it. This one here has a line. This here is the one where I had the mask on it. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this dark part actually partly down here. That makes any sense. Instead of it going up like in the picture, it's going down. And then here there's some dark spots. Let's connect those. Okay, and then here, that's the top. Okay, I think that was kind of the yellow there. So let's do a line there. And you don't have to finish off all of these lines. You can leave some of them so that they don't end. Otherwise, it's going to look too accurate. And we don't really want it to look accurate. Let's make this darker in there so that the bricks are actually overlapping this a bit. Okay, and this part is in shadow. Okay. Some of these look like they're deeper, so let's make this one deeper. I'm going to take this tape off because I don't know how big I'm going to frame this, and I want to make sure that I have some flexibility. And then you can have these lines, like if you see a masking mark that you didn't like this one's too round, just use that to create some designs in the rock. Here, as an example, it's a bit too strange. I could make this go like this, make this part darker, that sort of thing. And then this one is quite dark down here, and I like it. I kind of like the design in that one, so I'm just going to put that in. Yeah, some of these bricks are actually cut in partially. Okay, do one there. There's another one where I don't like the crack. Could have it join this one. I could have another one like that. It was a bit too much, so I'm going to soften one of those edges. You don't actually want all of these hard edges, so that's a thing to do, is just kind of soften some of them out when you do them. Because the focal point is actually the door. Okay, so that's good, and let's go over this way. Do these ones. Some nice dark. Take the tape off again. Okay, and this rock is sticking out so much that there's a big shadow underneath it. And then this thing goes like this. Now, funny enough, there's not a shadow here, but there should be a shadow in front of the rock. So this side looks a little bit unfinished, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. Where would the shadow be? Probably only in places where this is further underneath, but or where the brick actually, you can kind of see it here, where the brick is behind this. Some of these, I'm going to bring this a little bit further over because it's very thick on this side. And that's going to help us create an illusion. We don't have to finish every line, so I think we're okay there. Here it looks like there's no lines at all in the brick. We could even fade that into a different color. So make that cobalt. Okay, I think that's okay. I'm I've got this cobalt on my brush, I might just do some things over here. You can use your fingers. Like, we're going to leave that pretty white there. So I think that's good enough. It's we might even put a glaze over that after, just to push the whole thing to the background. I could even do that now. Let's do that. Because the contrast is all in this area right now, and we want to bring it into this area. That's the reason for looking at that as an option. So I'm going to go here, 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 and I'm going to create I'll remove this tape. I'm going to create a nice wash that you can use. From the cobalt teal and probably cerulean, so make it really nice and pale, and then just coat that on everything. Now here, okay, so that sends that a bit to the background, but over here I might want a bit more light over there. I think that's fine. And then perhaps make it a little bit thicker at the bottom. So I put a bit of neutral tint in there. I guess I'll rip my paper at the bottom there. Okay, so now our door is definitely the highlight. Okay, so the outside is wet, but the inside is not. So we can do our bright green, which we happen to have right here. And just do these flowers. Maybe put a little bit more. That might be a bit too wet because I'm getting kind of, it's not as bright as I would like, I guess is what I'm saying. Kind of muddy. I think that's okay. All right. So the only other thing we could do in here is just get rid of some of this white by putting more red in there along this part. Okay. And what I thought I would do with these locks is just put a wash over them as well. So they're shining, but they're not as bright as the white of the paper. Okay, I think we're done. Dark, you can also put some perspective lines in here. There is one here that goes kind of down there, but I find sometimes it helps to put these in. You don't really want too many. Let's just do one. And then this is kind of the crack in the sidewalk or whatever. So that's it. I think we are, oh, actually, I was thinking we could do a few little branches down where the flowers are in a nice green. Whether this will show up or not, I don't think it will. It might be too late, but we could give it a shot using scraping out. Let's see if I can find my palette knife. If you know palette knife, I have this. So maybe a few sticks. Okay, that doesn't work. So it's too late and you have not put any highlights of branches, just use a X-Acto. And you're actually ruining the paper here. That's what you're doing. That sort of thing. I don't think we really need to do that anywhere else. I think we're good. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed that. And see you on the next one. Let's look at our palette and try to figure out some paint mixtures.